And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another tremendous installment from very high above all the insipid and absolutely puerile forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Tuesday, back in the saddle at Cowboy State Politics headquarters. Thank you for joining the program. There's a lot to talk about. We've got a general election that's probably, most of the time, we don't really pay that much attention to the general election because all the races are already decided. Not so this time around. There's another candidate for governor in my pal Rebecca, and there are a number of races statewide where there are Democrats that are actually running. Now, the question is, how credible are these Democrats? You never know. Most of the time, the Democrat Party just throws candidates up so that they can maintain their status as a majority party, and here's a big question for you. So after the 2018 election, before the 2018 election, there was a huge number of Democrats that switched over to the Republican Party. And I think the number was right around 12,000 that was the total. And I think it was 6,000 actual Democrats that switched their party registration. Well, the truth is there's not that many Democrats in the state. They're nowhere near a majority. They're not even anywhere close to Republican registration in the state. So, and why that's important is if you do not have 10% of the vote in either I think it's the governor, secretary of state, or the U.S. House of Representatives, then you're not a major party anymore. If you're not a major party anymore, it means that you don't participate in the primary election. You don't even have a primary election. You have a caucus system, just like the Constitution Party or the crazy Libertarians or, the Green Party or whatever. You just have a convention and you select your candidate at that convention, which would be a big problem for the Democrat Party if they lost their majority party status. So in the 2018 election, you had roughly 6,000. Ish. We'll just use, kind of round numbers here. Then 2020, 2022, 2024. And, there were a lot of people that, just switched over so that they could participate in the Republican primary. Well, then we passed the crossover voting law. Now you can't change your party affiliation after May 14th. And so, all the way through the primary. And then, after the primary, you can change your affiliation. But the question is, how many of them are actually going to do that? So this year, there was roughly 2,000 people that switched from the Democrat Party to the Republican Party. So now, we're up to 14,000. But the question is, what's the margin? If it were 14,000 people for the Republican Party, that wouldn't even scratch the surface. But when you have as few numbers as the Wyoming Democratic Party does, you don't have that much to lose. So the question is, can they get 10% in one of those elections? And so one of the reasons why you're seeing so many candidates, and again, we don't really know how credible the candidates are. There's a couple of them for some of the top 5 positions that I don't know. I don't think they're credible. We'll get into them, in later programs, but I don't really think they pose a credible threat to any Republican candidate. But if you have a number of people running for House races, which they do, and you have all candidates for all 5 of the top 5 electeds, which they do, then you might convince Democrat voters to go back to the Democrat Party and participate on the Democrat ticket. So that may happen. But the big question is, will they have enough? Will enough people remember when they walk into the general election voting booth to switch their affiliation or to do it beforehand? How many will do that? I don't know. I mean, that's a big question mark in my mind. But I think when your political party is on, I guess a precipice like this, then you don't have that many to lose. Now, why is that? Why would I even suggest that that's a problem? I mean, you would think that the big voice on the right would really just wish that the Democrat Party would go away. Not so, my friends. Actually, the best thing that could happen to Wyoming politics is if a whole bunch of those Democrats that are now masquerading as Republicans went back to the Democrat Party, and we could actually have a legitimate debate, and one where we talk about policy instead of just who's the better Republican, which, I mean, that's a necessary argument to have if you have a whole bunch of redcoats hanging out in the Wyoming Republican Party, because you got to find something to differentiate this candidate from this candidate when they both say that they're Republican. And if that's what they're running on, well, then you have to have an analysis of, all right, what are the Republican things that they believe in? What are, where do they believe in abortion? Like Melissa Butcher, no matter what she says on her website. Do they have such crazy socialist policies like Micah Sturdivant does on, at least what she campaigned on? So, I mean, do they have those principles, or are they actually free market capitalist, small government type people? Well, you have to have that debate. Now, if somehow the Democrat Party became stronger in the state, then we could actually have a policy discussion, because it does away with that whole really murky debeme So I think it would be a good thing, but it's a big question if they can pull it off. You remember how all of the redcoats through the last, 2 sessions, 3 sessions, whatever, down in the legislature, Wyoming solutions for Wyoming problems. And if that didn't work, it would be, well, that's a D.C. issue. That's a national issue. It doesn't have anything to do with Wyoming. You remember that? How we're all told that conservatives, we only focus on national issues and we don't focus on what's happening in Wyoming. Well, I have in my hot little hands, my friends, an op-ed from the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle, probably the second biggest newspaper in the state, maybe the biggest one. The biggest newspaper in the state was almost always the Casper Star Tribune, the Red Star Tribune. But they stopped actually reporting news, and their distribution went down, and so I don't know what their distribution numbers are like now. But the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle, it's always remained pretty solid. You go to downtown Cheyenne, they got a nice big building. I'm amazed that it hasn't been struck by lightning yet. I mean, when you have articles like this, I mean, you might anger the big guy upstairs. But this op-ed appeared on the website of the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle. I first saw it this morning. It may have been, it's been on there a couple days. So it's dated August 22nd. Here's the title of it. Counterpoint. Pundits call it socialism, but many Americans call it common sense. Now, go back in your memory banks for me, if you would. Can you remember a time when a Wyoming paper published an an opinion piece, an editorial. I mean, okay, so you probably had a letter to the editor or two that probably mentioned socialism. But when is it that you can remember that a Wyoming newspaper actually printed a guest column about socialism and how great it was? I don't remember one. But there again, I mean, they're newspapers, and I really don't think they have that much influence in the state. The biggest news outlet in the state, unfortunately, is the Cowboy. And then, it's all online media now. So newspapers, not so hot. But here's what it says. And this is, again, I find this fascinating. Just listen to it. Quote, the debate over capitalism versus socialism often looks like a battle of cartoon caricatures. Monopoly man versus the Marx monster. Across the planet, there are countless flavors of capitalism and socialism, unique mashups of free markets and government policies. Into this muddle wade the right-wing ideologues who fear the red socialist demon hiding in every corner. Okay, so first, is a government program socialism? So let's take Medicare, for example. Is Medicare socialism? Well, I don't think that it's necessarily the role of government. Nowhere in the Constitution will you find health care. It's not in the Wyoming Constitution, I can tell you that for sure. But it's certainly not one of the roles of government. So there's that. But what is socialism? Well, socialism is when the government has control without actually owning the means of production. So, for example, you own your business, but you don't decide what happens to your business. The government tells you what happens to your business. It's got pretty much all the same trappings as communism. It's just it's just a pit stop on the way to communism. Full-blown communism, the government owns the means of production. Socialism, government just directs it. And so while and what this author is trying to do is play on the words social program, trying to equate socialism with social program. And I'll give you, there are some tendencies of things like Medicare and SNAP and all of those things that do have socialist tendencies to it. But it's not a direct competition between an economic model. And that's the biggest point, that socialism is an economic model. Social programs are a government policy. So the economic model, and the author admits it in the very first sentence, socialism versus capitalism. So this author is not really talking about, Medicare or so-called affordable housing, which I would argue that that's kind of socialistic, or the Wyoming Business Council, though I would call that kind of socialistic. It's certainly crony capitalism at the very least. But it continues. If Fox News existed in the 1950s, they would have labeled Republican Dwight Eisenhower a socialist for taxing the wealthy and making broad public investments to expand home ownership, enable debt-free higher education, and build infrastructure and technology that expanded the modern middle class. Yet, what do these labelers call modern-day China? It's a communist country. A country that mints hundreds of billions a year and dominates global markets with private production. Are they socialist or capitalist? They're not capitalists. Really, the only person who really owns anything in China is the Chinese Communist Party and the government of China. To suggest anything else is pure fantasy. Nothing happens in China, really, without the blessing of the communist parties. So to suggest that it's some sort of, communo-capitalist country, it's really not, okay? Now, are they an economic powerhouse? Yes, but it is all at the direction of the Chinese government. Meanwhile, social democracies, we don't have a democracy, like Canada and Northern European countries, have progressive tax systems and strong social safety nets. Sweden, with its generous welfare state, has the highest rates of entrepreneurship than the United States. By the way, Sweden doesn't really have socialism. They have a lot of socialist programs, social programs, but it's not a socialist country. This is the argument that people like Bernie Sanders and probably Sam Mead. By the way, did you know that the guy running for Wyoming governor donated to Bernie Sanders and Act Blue and still called himself a Republican? There might be a reason why he lost. Anyway, let's see here. These countries also have higher rates of social mobility than the U.S. Yeah, downward. Everybody becomes equal because they become more miserable and poorer, meaning it's easier for lower income people to escape poverty and become stable. The American dream apparently has moved offshore. This is another argument that those on the left use, that the American dream no longer exists, that it's impossible for you to be successful. Nope, can't do it. You gotta be one of these rich characters. Nothing could be farther from the truth, my friends. Everybody has an equal opportunity to succeed. From the moment that you come out, you come into this world, you have just as much opportunity as the next guy. Now, or gal. Now, you may not have the skills, you may not have the intelligence, you may not have as many lucky breaks, but from word go, you have just as much opportunity as the next person. Theoretically, we live in a meritocracy, though I would argue that we've moved far away from that. And I've got a couple stories today that we're going to talk about that kind of prove that, there are so many people involved in government that don't believe that this is a meritocracy. And actually, what's funny is there's I'm not even going to talk too much about it, but Rod Miller's got a column up, and now he admits that the open range record and this program have seen dramatic increases in viewership. It's funny. It's only funny to me because not 2 weeks ago he was saying that we don't really have an audience at all. But the point is that in this country, you can be a guy sitting in your apartment that gets ticked off at the Casper Star Tribune, start your own program, and then work hard at it, and magically you become a pretty good sized force in the media. That is all possible in this country. If you work hard and you apply yourself, you will be successful. Now, there's no guarantee on the level of your success. Certainly not everybody is going to become a millionaire, and definitely not everybody is going to become a billionaire. But from word go, you have an opportunity, an equal opportunity to succeed. You do not, however, have equal outcomes as everybody else. And that, my friends, is the problem with anybody that's arguing in favor of socialism, because it's not an argument that's based in opportunity. That is, from the beginning, it is an argument that is based on outcomes. That is, everybody's going to be the same, and we're going to be equally miserable and equally poor is how socialism always ends. All right, so this idiotic author continues. These welfare states, with their higher tax on the wealthy, exist comfortably alongside healthy market economies. Really? Name another economy. I guess you could probably choose China, that's equal to the United States. Is France, is Sweden, is Germany, is the Netherlands, is Spain, Italy? Do any of them have an economy that is anywhere close to the economy of the United States? The answer to that is no. And to suggest that that is a result of their social programs is to ignore the high amount of debt that they actually have. Now, the U.S. we just passed $40 trillion in debt, which doesn't speak very highly of us, by the way. But look at the overall size of the economy. Okay, it's way bigger than $40 trillion. It's still, we're dealing with staggering piles of money here. But the truth is, there isn't one of them. And so when the author in the Wyoming Tribune Eagle says that these welfare states with their higher taxes on wealthy exist comfortably alongside healthy market economies. Okay, yeah, they exist. Perhaps they're healthy, but they're nowhere near the size. And let's talk about another thing. Why does anyone have a right to the fruits of your labor? Why does anybody have a right to say that they have a claim on something else that you've earned? There's no logical explanation except to say you're an evil rich person. Well, my friends, I have never worked for a poor person. I've never worked for anybody that, maybe they struggle to write a paycheck for sure. but they still weren't poor. Poor people do not employ people. Folks that are successful and they're trying to build a business do. Now, I'm not saying that every business is successful. Certainly, every small business owner knows that you have to work hard, that you're probably going to sacrifice weekends. You're probably not going to get to go on as many vacations. And sometimes you may have to cancel plans because your lazy employees don't show up. That's the cost of owning a business and being successful. But nobody has a right to the fruits of your labor. Nobody that can say, though they often do, that you didn't earn it. You know, you have Obama that said, you didn't build that. You know, somebody else made that happen. That's not true, my friends. There are, that argument is, and most of this argument here in this piece is based on the idea, well, we have roads. You know, you didn't build the roads. Somebody else built them. You know, your trucks that supply your store drive on publicly funded roads. Well, those are the necessary functions of government, the proper role of government in this republic. So to suggest that just because you pay taxes and the road outside your business was built with your tax dollars, that's how socialism, it's not. Okay, that's the proper role of a government in a republic. Infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, police, fire, and unfortunately, in the Wyoming Constitution, we're going to pay for all of the schooling. Though I think the word education does not appear in the U.S. Constitution. That was a creation. By the way, the first person to suggest the Department of Education was Andrew Johnson. It wasn't Jimmy Carter. The first person to suggest it was Andrew Johnson. And then it was Jimmy Carter who actually created the Department of Education. But that doesn't exist in the Constitution, and it really isn't the role of government at all, no matter what the Democrats and the leftists say. But point being is those are the necessary and proper role of government, excluding the schools. So roads, infrastructure, water, sewer, the police, and fire. You don't get to argue that, well, that's socialism. No, it's not, because socialism is an economic theory. It also ends up being a control theory because, the socialism, the end goal either goes one of two ways. It goes full-blown fascism, the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party was the National Socialist Party in Germany, or it goes just full-blown communism. And really, when you get down to it, there's not that big of a difference between fascism and communism. So continuing with this, let's see here. These criticisms conflate a set of policy proposals, most of them quite popular, with an economic system where the government owns the means of production. However, this well-trodden attack doesn't seem to be working anymore, especially for younger generations. Well, that's what communism is owning the means of production. Full-blown communism. Again, socialism is a pit stop on the way to it. Younger voters see the grotesque inequalities of wealth and power that distort the economy and block opportunity for the non-rich. That is the trope that pretty much every leftist used, that there are these evil rich people that obviously they didn't earn what they have. And I've got a couple sound bites, video segments I'm going to play for you later. This is the same trope that this El Sayed character is running in Michigan. Well, when you get to 100 million, you really don't need any more money. Why? You don't deserve that. You absolutely do. And the reason people become billionaires is they earned it. And even if you're making money off of the money that you earned, i.e. in interest or loans or whatever you do, investments in the stock market, I guess essentially that's a loan. You're buying stock in a company. They're using your money to expand. So yeah, you are earning it. And at some point, why should you not be able to profit from it? There is nowhere in the creation of this republic where that line of thinking actually works. The truth is, my friends, that you absolutely have a right to the fruits of your labor. Nobody else does. Nobody else can say, well, you earned too much money. Well, maybe I worked hard and built a good business. Well, look at Donald Trump. That guy has had several businesses fail, but now he's a successful billionaire business person. He's the president of the United States with a rockin' company. He absolutely built that business. Now, did his father leave him some cash? Sure. But those were the fruits of his father's labor, right? And if he chooses to give that money to his son, that's his decision. That's not up to the government, nor does it mean that anybody is evil just because they happen to have a little bit more cash than somebody else. If you don't have as much money as you want, maybe you should work harder. Open a business. Work weekends. When your pals are going to the lake water skiing, maybe you're stuck in your business selling your stuff to people. Maybe that's just how it works. When my parents owned a sporting goods store, when my sister and I were young, we worked a lot of weekends. There was a lot of times where we didn't get to go play. There was a lot of times where we wanted to go up the mountain, but we weren't able to go because we had to work. There were a lot of times where we could go up there for a night, get up early, drive down the mountain, and open the store because we didn't have an employee to do it. People who work hard, generally speaking, are successful. Now, there's no guarantee on your success. You may have a crappy business idea. You may be the guy that's selling duct tape wallets, and then you realize that there really isn't that big of a market for them. You see, my friends, that nobody has a right or a claim on what you earn. The only person that does is you. And so suggesting that because you became successful, that you somehow have to give that money to somebody that's poor, well, why didn't the poor person work harder? Why didn't the poor person take advantage of the opportunities that they were given right when they were born? Okay, I get it. Crap happens to people. That's absolutely true. And some people are not going to succeed because of it. But we live in a supposedly capitalist country to where those things happen, and I'm sorry about your luck, but just because somebody is more successful than you doesn't mean that you have a claim to anything that they own. Frankly, it actually means the opposite. This one continues. And again, I said at the beginning, this is kind of a shocking defense of socialism. 2 full pages worth of it. And it appeared on August 22nd in the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle. Let's do a little bit more of it, then we're going to take a break. Let's see here. They watch with alarm as billionaire-backed private equity firms buy up healthcare facilities and squeeze consumers into every corner of the economy. They see how both major political parties have been captured by the billionaire donor class and failed to address stagnant wages and rising business costs. All generations now understand that the old American dream has expired, with 7 in 10 experiencing economic insecurity. These folks still hope hard work could lead to a decent life, to own a home, take on a vacation, pass opportunities to their children, and retire before they died. They feel the constant stress of knowing that one's job loss, illness, disability, or divorce away from living in their car. This is straight up class warfare, my friends. If any of those things happen, sorry about your luck. If we believe in free market economics and a free market economy, we have to agree that sometimes those things happen, and yes, it is unfortunate, but that doesn't mean that somebody else owes you part or all of what they earned. Why shouldn't somebody who has worked hard and built a big business be able to invest that money wherever they want? Why shouldn't those people be able to invest their cash in a candidate that they believe is going to benefit their business? Why wouldn't you do that? I mean, honestly, it would be kind of dumb, a really dumb business decision for you not to advocate for the things that are going to help your business within the bounds of the Constitution, right? It makes sense that if you have a candidate like this person or El Sayed up in Michigan or frankly, a lot of the people that got elected in the primary, why wouldn't you put money in the other guy's campaign to try to make sure that the socialist doesn't win or that the radical Democrat doesn't win? You can because you worked hard and it's your money. That's what the whole Citizens United decision was all about, my friends, that everybody has an equal opportunity to participate in the political and economic system that this wonderful country created. So, I mean, if you've got the cash, it's completely up to you where you want to use it, because we live in a free country. And that's, I guess, that's essentially what this whole thing boils down to. That a lot of these folks don't want to live in a free country, that they don't want to live in a place where opportunity rules and not them. Because those people who didn't work as hard, and who maybe weren't as lucky in some cases, where those people are successful and some of the others aren't. But it's straight up class warfare, that by virtue of you being poor, you deserve something else. Nobody's going to give you anything, my friends. The only person that you deserve anything from is yourself. That's it. Nobody else. You don't have a claim to anybody else's labor or the success that they've made or the fortune that they've built or the incredible life that they've built for them and their family. The only person that has a claim to that is you. You have a claim to what you did. We live in a country of rugged individualism, which, by the way, a couple of days ago, I published an op-ed on or an editorial, I guess you would call it, on the Open Range Record, and it's called the Cowboy State Contradiction. And the graphic, I love the graphic. It's mountains. It's Blacktooth Mountain up above Sheridan, and it says Wyoming didn't vote for rugged individualism. We certainly did not. In this primary election, we voted for a lot of people who believe a lot of this stuff. More social programs, more social spending, more government dependence. And my friends, you are going to get the things that sort of thinking leads to. It's going to be higher taxes. It's going to be more of your money given to people that don't necessarily deserve it. Voters always get what they deserve. In every, with the exception of the 2020 election, which I'm convinced was rigged, pretty much every other election, it's been absolutely right, and the voters get what they deserve. And good Lord, my friends, you're going to see the results of the 2026 primary election. It's not going to be pretty, but at least it'll be interesting. We'll have plenty of material to talk about on this program. All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll continue when we come back. Are you sick to death of being told what to think? Maybe you don't even realize that it's happening. Freedom Caucus bad, big spending, big government, liberal, Republican good. Conservatives are bad and they want to starve little children. I have heard it all, my friends. We are way past the time when the news was just the news, if it ever was. But wouldn't it be nice if you had a news platform that was at least honest about what they were telling you? News on the news page, opinion on the opinion page. That's exactly what the Open Range Record is. Go to the website, openrangerecord.com. News, analysis, opinion, and investigative journalism. One more time, that website is openrangerecord.com. You can listen and watch Cowboy State Politics live on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble every Tuesday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pay attention to all that other block-headed, Borg-like so-called news if you want. But if you want to get the real story, watch Cowboy State Politics live. And now, back to the program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live on a Tuesday. Thank you for watching, my friends. I'm your host, David Iverson, Wyoming's big voice on the right. Also from the Wyoming Turkey Vulture, primary results point to a new direction for the Wyoming legislature. Oh, don't. Actually, they don't point to a new direction. They point to a very, very old and familiar direction, namely the same one that has pretty much been governing Wyoming for about 40 years. The same one that drove our economic output to below 1%, well below the national average. The same leadership that developed all these great social programs that tax you to death, that allow your local government to give your money away to people that don't necessarily deserve it. Yeah, those people. That's where we're headed again. And I quote from the Wyoming Turkey Vulture. Today's primary election results could signal a significant shift in the direction of the Wyoming legislature, according to Ryan Williamson, the associate professor of political science at the University of Wyoming, who specializes in electoral and legislative politics, spoke with the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle on Thursday. He said he believes a main reason behind the rebuke of the Freedom Caucus was the policies the caucus members pursued in the most recent legislative session were not particularly popular in the state. Well, they weren't popular with a certain segment of the state, and that is the Wyoming traditional political class, the Redcoats. That's who those policies were not really all that popular with. And that's why they created a coalition of lobbyist organizations. Yeah, all of those associations that the Taxpayers Association, the Stock Growers Association, the Education Association, the YO for Business, whatever that is. All of these organizations that you got mail from, they're all lobbyist organizations. And so the Redcoats formed a coalition between those folks, some really mega rich liberal political action committees. Americans for Prosperity is one of those. And I think the reason why we can say that it's a liberal political action committee, it's pretty easy because, all the candidates they supported are pretty much raging liberals like Ogden Driscoll and the rest of them. And, Melissa Butcher and Micah Sturdivant, and they're all you got to do. And it's not me saying that. It's them. Read the campaign literature that they sent you. When you get lines like a party over or people over platform. Okay, so not a Republican, not going to focus on the platform. Okay, got it. Healthcare that meets us where we are. That's not the proper role of government at all. At all. Like, government has no place in healthcare. The governor, by the way, he's developed his own healthcare strike force. And he's going to use the next couple of months to travel around the state and hear from all sorts of stakeholders. And so that we can get Wyoming further involved with your healthcare. Isn't it going to be great? Yeah, healthcare that meets us where we are. Anyway, those are the people that all of the conservative policies they didn't agree with all those conservative policies. Those actions, which included an attempt to slash the University of Wyoming's budget by $40 million and eliminate the Wyoming Business Council, may still have been fresh in people's minds, potentially leading to the electoral backlash they received, Williamson said. You see, frugalness, my friends, is kind of a hard sell. Because we live in a state that is so used to government handouts. And the government handouts is even kind of a misnomer. It's taxpayer handouts. But a big percentage of the population of Wyoming, got really used to that, including the business community. So I know that there are other states, they get involved in business development, and business development's important. And Ogden Driscoll said this over and over, even during a debate. He said, well, absolutely, it's the role of government. Where? Now he claims, every decision we make affects business. This is true. It also affects everybody else. But why is it the government's job to try to develop business? Okay, business and government are two separate things. Okay, businesses are supposed to operate independently of government. Okay, yeah, so you have taxes, and you got to pay your taxes, but so does everybody else. Why is it government's job to get involved in creating a business or benefiting a business? Well, it's not anywhere. It's never been the role of government. And there's no way that you can make that argument stick, except to say what Ogden Driscoll said in that debate. Everything we do affects a business. We should absolutely develop business. Okay, so there's a nuance here. Government's real job, my friends, is to create an environment where business can prosper, and they do that by keeping taxes low and keeping government small. That is, only taxing so much is absolutely necessary for the proper functions of government. I mean, that's the only place that government has any sort of role in business. And yet, even this associate professor of politics, I guess is what he called it, the professor of political science, I guess is what he says. But even he is saying, well, yeah, it's people didn't like that very much. Well, of course not, because they're used to government handouts. Because it really is kind of a tough sell, though it is the right argument to make, that government shouldn't be involved in business and that we shouldn't be picking winners and losers. So the people that win out of that arrangement, that is, like, for example, BWXT. The governor gave them $100 million out of his slush fund, which, by the way, the governor should not have a slush fund. There should not ever be a big, giant pile of money that the governor can dole out to whomever he wants. It is the House of Representatives that holds the purse strings. Now, it is also the So where we left off is with this professor of political science at the University of Wyoming. And, he says that, well, one of the reasons the election turned out the way that it did, and I don't know that I necessarily disagree with him, is, people didn't like the policies of the Freedom Caucus saying we need to get rid of the Wyoming Business Council, which that is absolutely the correct argument. That if you do not, and this is one of my favorite things that Ken has said, Agent 29, which, by the way, from everything I've been told, Ken will be back tomorrow and we'll be back in the downtown studio tomorrow. But nobody has a right to the fruits of another man's labor. And so when you pay taxes, the whole idea is that those taxes go towards the necessary functions of government, right? Roads, bridges, police, you got to have some administration, highway patrol. Okay, so YDOT, super, super expensive, and I really don't like hitting potholes. So those taxes, the idea being you pay those taxes, they go to those sorts of things. So why is it then that those tax dollars end up in the pockets of your competitor? Why is it that the taxes that I have to pay end up in the pocket of my competition? Why? I mean, explain how on earth that is in any way even close to the Constitution? It's not. And with the Wyoming Business Council, you're talking about, like orders of magnitude in tax dollars, millions upon millions of dollars that are given to this business or that business or that business. And most of them have not done well, by the way. There are some shiny examples. Okay, the business park in Sheridan is one of them, though I would argue that those businesses would have come here anyway if the argument had been made to them. That is, we've got a low tax environment. We got a great community to live in. Take Weatherby, for example, right? You're going to be really hard to find a place that loves their guns more than this place. And we have low taxes and we got this great business park. I mean, I would argue that those businesses would have come here anyway. Outside and apart of creating any sort of tax benefits for any business. But the truth is, we have the Wyoming Business Council, which hands over millions and millions and millions of dollars to businesses. I mean, they're absolutely picking winners and losers. They admit that. Josh Durrell absolutely admitted that with his Kickstart program. Yeah, what that was, okay, so this is your tax dollars, the Wyoming Business Council, and they have what they call the Kickstart contest. And that is you fill out an application for your business and you submit it to them. And if they like it, they'll pick the winners of their contest, and those people get your tax money. So they literally are picking winners and losers. So when you boil it all down, that's another business getting the fruits of your labor, right? Your business has to pay taxes, and then those tax dollars are rounded over and given to your competition. How in any way is that fair? But one of the reasons that argument, or there are two main reasons really, that argument was so successful. One, that you had millions and millions of dollars benefiting those types of candidates. The second reason is it's a government handout, right? It's really hard, as Rush used to say, it's really hard to compete with Santa Claus. But you can do it. You know, another great example, thank you for bringing this up, Patrick, is the Pro Rodeo Cowboys Hall of Fame. So they were going to move to Cheyenne anyway. And then Ogden Driscoll runs a bill to give them $15 million. And this is an example that I used in my op-ed. Nothing says government picking, nothing says Democrat Party more than giving tax dollars to a cowboy. I mean, nothing is a bigger contradiction in the cowboy state than giving tax dollars to a cowboy organization. The cowboy being the quintessential rugged individualist. But in Wyoming, we gave cowboys $15 million. But my friends, and another comment, yes, you're exactly right. And let me put this one up here. So we have a dependency problem, thus the lowest of all states contributing to the GDP. The Wyoming Grant Summit is also a tax dollar giveaway. It all is, my friends. And if you have such a big tax giveaway problem, you are necessarily going to see a decrease in economic output. Wyoming has one of the lowest economic outputs of the entire country. And that is what these traditional Republicans have given you. And the reason why is the number one industry in Wyoming, number one employer, number one, destination for your tax dollars and your money is government. So why is our economic output so low? Because government is the number one industry. It is impossible for the government to create economic development. Here's why, and I explain this with an example. So let's say, and you can use this on your pals, right? So let's say you get a job with YDOT. Okay, great. I mean, it's great for you, right? You got great benefits, probably a pretty good wage. It's so hard to get fired from the government. You got job security. It's awesome, right? So you have a job, you can pay for your family, you can buy groceries, pay for the new truck payment, all that stuff. So when you get paid, you take your tax dollar government paycheck to the grocery store and you buy groceries with it, right? Which you have to live on, and which you've absolutely earned that money. I have no qualms about that. But what is your government paycheck? It's tax dollars. That's the only way that somebody who works for the government gets paid, through tax dollars, because the government doesn't generate its own money. The government consumes money. So you take your government paycheck to the Albertsons or Ridley's or whatever, and you buy your groceries. So you're just spending tax dollars. So those tax dollars then get recycled in the form of more tax dollars. It doesn't generate any new revenue. The only way that you get an increase in economic output is if somebody creates a new product or a new service, a new business, and that new business generates revenue that was not in the market before. Okay? It's new revenue, or existing businesses expand. But again, it's new revenue, right? You're selling more guns, you're selling more cars, you're selling more widgets. It doesn't really matter what it is. But if there's not something new being created in the market, there is no increase in GDP. And so those government tax dollars that you get from your white-odd paycheck go to the grocery store where you buy your groceries and then get recycled around. And so even if the Wyoming Business Council were to give out $15 million to business X, those are tax dollars, right? That's not new revenue generation in the market. Those are tax dollars. It's already been taxed. And now that business is going to use those tax dollars and be taxed again. There's no net economic increase. Now, you could say, well, the business owner, he's making more money. Really? Do you know what the overhead or not the overhead, the profit margin is in most businesses? It's really small. It's not these evil capitalists making a killing. The profit margin in most businesses is pretty tiny, unless it's a service industry, in which case you still have a pretty high overhead. And then look at any hair salon, right? Your biggest expense is labor, and then supplies, and then everything else is gravy after that. I mean, you got to pay for rent and all that, or pay all your utility bills. Service industries tend to have a higher profit margin, but retail businesses like your local hardware store, or the flower shop, or whatever, the profit margin is actually pretty low. And so, when you're taking your government-funded paycheck and you spend it in that business, yes, there's a little bit of cash that goes into the business, but they still get taxed on it. And so those government dollars those tax dollars continually circulate, and nothing new is created. That's why our GDP is so low, because government is the number one industry. And all of those policies are pushed, supported, passed, and then passed again by the liberal redcoats that have controlled this state for the last 40 years. Many of the same folks that this state just reelected. Can you say Chi-Com Som Albert Sommers? Which, by the way, I think there's a decent chance he's going to end up being the Speaker of the House. So, my friends, there is a big reason why our GDP is so low. And it's not because we don't have a lot of businesses. We do. It's because the biggest industry in Wyoming is government. And when that happens, your GDP goes down because there's nothing new being added to the market. All right, let's go ahead and take another break. And when we come back, we'll continue on with the program. We're going to talk about the election a little bit. I'm getting a little sick of the election, but we're going to hit it again. This one, we'll be talking about registered voters and, the voter turnout. Do you think it was higher? Do you think it was lower? You're being told that it was a blockbuster election. We'll find out if that's true coming up. The calendar says that it's summer, and you believe it. Oh, that's just so cute. But you obviously haven't lived here very long, have you? And you probably think that the weather is just going to continue to warm up. You don't have to worry about snow or ice or 30-degree temperatures anymore. In case you've forgotten, this is Wyoming, my friend, and that sort of thinking doesn't work here. 1 minute, it could be 75 and sunny, and 10 minutes later, snow. Whatever the weather, you need a pair of socks that'll keep your feet cool and dry even on the hottest of summer days. And if you happen to run into that freak midsummer snowstorm, trust me, it's happened. I've seen it. You'll stay nice and toasty warm. Well, your feet anyway. To get you a pair, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. These are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election.
Siberia,
Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada.
Straight to hell. Iceland.
France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the last year and a half been more than you could bear? Well, if it has, you've come to the right place. Call my friend Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way.
Cowboy State Politics is only going to get stronger. This program is only going to continue to expand. Cowboy State Politics Live is the #1 conservative podcast in this state on the nation's top 100 conservative podcasts. Thank you for listening, my friends. Thank you for everything you do for the program. By the way, do me a favor. Every time you listen to an episode of Cowboy State Politics or you watch one, whether it's the podcast or the live show, leave me a review. If you can. It depends on where you watch it from. But if you can, leave me a review, forward it, repost it. That way, the audience of Cowboy State Politics continues to grow, and we continue getting the message of conservatism out to those people who desperately need it. And here's the truth, my friends. Like, if politicians are being honest, that is, if politicians could look at things objectively outside of their own, desiring of power. If they could set all that aside, they would look at conservative principles and say, gee, those have always worked. And all this other socialism stuff, healthcare and affordable housing and all that crap, none of that stuff really works. The truth is, the answer has always been conservatism. If you look at any healthy economy, and even if you throw the example of China, well, China's not conservative and they do great. Yeah, a lot of it's propped up. Okay, so they have entire cities that they've built that no one lives in because they have to generate. They have to prop up the economy. And when you build a house out of cards, well, eventually there's going to be a gust of wind and it's going to take it out. But the answer, my friends, is always free market capitalism, freedom, conservatism, lower spending, and let you be the arbiter of the things that you earn. That you are the one that decides where your paycheck goes and where it doesn't go. And when you're successful, you should be able to enjoy that success, and nobody should be able to tell you what you have to do with your money. And you certainly shouldn't be told that you have to give it to somebody else. This whole, when you've earned $100 million, I think that's enough. Really? Maybe I want to build a big giant. And by the way, where do most people work? Well, okay, so in Wyoming, most people work for the government. But aside from Wyoming, most people work for small businesses. Okay, we tend to think that, okay, well, Walmart's a giant employer, Amazon is a giant employer, and they are. This is true. But they don't employ the majority of people. Now, Wyoming is different from a lot of states in many respects. One of those happens to be this question. But if you look at it nationwide, most people work for a small business. It's either the local flower shop, or it's the grocery store, or it's the corner shoe store. We don't have those in Wyoming, or the corner rare book store. Or pick a small business. I was amazed when lovely Christine and I were in New York. Of course, New York's a huge city, but we went by crazy business. We went by a business that all they sell is buttons. Another one, all they sell is zippers, and another one, all they sell is shoelaces. Now, can you imagine somebody trying to open up a button store in Wyoming? It would probably go bankrupt, just because there isn't the market there to support it. But when you're in the garment district and, you got, I don't know, probably 5,000 businesses that are creating some form of clothes, you can make a living selling buttons, but not here. But in other larger cities, there's all manner of small businesses, motorcycle shops, golf shops, you name it. Most people work for a small business, except in Wyoming. Most people here work for the government, or the government is the largest employer. And so, oh man, Patrick, you just hit the nail on the head. So Patrick says the invisible hand should be taught in public schools. Now, Patrick, he's absolutely referring to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. And, while I don't necessarily ascribe wholeheartedly to Adam Smith's entire interpretation of the free market, we should focus on. And here's the part that I disagree with. You have to have some regulation somewhere, right? You have to have some regulation that says, you can't just go, irresponsibly pop a well out in the Powder River Basin that isn't cased properly, that isn't abiding by environmental codes. We can't have businesses dumping, toxic chemicals out on the ground. You can't have your local service station dumping the used oil out in a hole they've dug in their backyard. You have to have some regulation. But generally speaking, yes, we should have a market that is as free of government interference as humanly possible. The government has no place in business except to create the conditions by which a business can prosper. That is, keeping taxes low and keeping regulations to the bare minimum. But Patrick, you are absolutely right. If we taught Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations in high schools, certainly more children would understand free market economics and why they work and why socialism doesn't work. Actually, you know what? Socialism is pretty effective at doing one thing, making everybody poor, because that's the end result. All right, so a little bit more about Wyoming's election. Now, I'm sure you've heard or seen the headlines. It was a blockbuster turnout. It was huge. Huge. Nobody really could have foreseen the lines and lines and lines of people all the way down. No, not down the blocks. That didn't happen. Well, the truth is the turnout in 2026 was dramatically lower than it was in 2022. And I've got a graph here to show you. Let's see if I can get this pulled up correctly. I still haven't figured out why the streaming platform. Nope, that's not what I want. Why the streaming platform doesn't always share the screen properly. It's kind of irritating. Let's see here. Yeah, here we go. We can do it this time. Okay, so here is, and it's kind of fuzzy, but this is the graph I was talking about. So way over here on the right-hand side, this is voter turnout in 2026. And you can see that it's above the 2024 election, but it's below 2022. Now, the 2022 election, that was the Liz Cheney election. So, voter turnout was really high. But you can see, it was pretty much, if you drew a trend line, it's pretty much level, maybe a little bit higher. But the truth is, there were dramatically fewer voters that showed up to the polls this election than in 2022. Okay? It's higher than 2024, lower than 2022. So what that tells you, pretty much the same. And so, the question then is, what was the difference? So let me go again to, this one's from Wildfile, the Liz Store, the Democrat representative, Wyoming's version of George Soros' Liz Store funded news organization, so-called news organization. Here's what they say. Wyoming voter turnout in the primary election among registered voters was on pace with primaries going back to 2016. So at least they're kind of honest. Of the 273,000 registered voters, 150,000 cast a ballot, putting the primary election turnout rate at about 54.9%. So, in other words, and just listen to the numbers for a minute, there's 586,000 people in Wyoming. Just using round numbers, okay, not all of those are eligible to vote, but I would say a good 400,000 are probably eligible to vote. Of those people that are eligible, only 273,000 are registered voters. Okay, so roughly half. Okay, of those, only 150,000 actually showed up at the polls, or half of those. And so this election, only 25%, using rough numbers, participated in the election. Only a quarter of the state. And so to say that voter participation was up, okay, it's relative. That's like saying, hey, our educational test scores are up above the national average. Okay, well, that's probably true. It also means that you're right in line with all the other mediocre states, that nobody is really doing that great, and you end up being the cream of the crop. Not saying the teachers are, I'm saying the test scores are. And there could be lots of contributing factors there. But really, when we say voter turnout was up, it's only 25% of the state, and it's a little above half of the people that are actually registered to vote. Let's hear. Harry says, 2024 Republican participation declined in all 29 Sheridan County precincts relative to 2022. 2026 produced a substantial Republican primary participation rebound. Okay, but it's still way below 2022, and it's not really all that above the average. If you look at all the elections going back to 2016, which is the point that Wildpile is making, it was not a blockbuster election. And so the narrative that is used that tons of people rejected the Freedom Caucus. Okay, so the Freedom Caucus did get rejected for a variety of reasons, but it was not an overall majority. It was not people coming out of the polls who had never come out to vote before. It was pretty much on par with just about every other election. Let's see here. Based on Wyoming's voting age population, last estimated by the state in 2024 at 454,000. Okay, so there you go. The eligible voting age, 454,000. So I was actually a little bit below that. Eligible voter turnout was closer to 33%. The state recorded a 27% among voting age residents in the 2024 primary, 40%, that's Liz Cheney, in 2022, and 31.5% in 2020. Total ballot tallies followed Wyoming demographics, with the most populated counties, Laramie and Natrona, counting 23,325 ballots and 17,000. So think about that. Natrona County, it's the second biggest county in Wyoming, and there was only 17,144 votes cast. That is a dismal report. Absolutely dismal. Registered voter turnout also followed the blend of political and population county characteristics. Wyoming's least populated counties, that is Niobrara, ranked 23rd of 23 counties at about 2,400 votes. That's it. It's pretty sad, my friends. 22nd was Hot Springs at only 4,600 votes. Those counties showing the highest percentage of ballots cast among registered voters, 69.6, 69.4, 68.7, respectively, Teton County and Albany County, both of which are Democrat counties. That shouldn't surprise anybody. Of the 150,000 votes cast, 88% were Republican, 9% were Democratic, which closely tracks with Wyoming's Republican-Democrat split among registered voters. Now, that 9% is interesting because that is below the threshold of being a major party. Now, remember, the Democrats had their primary election the same day that Republicans did. And so the total amount of voter turnout was, it only amounted to 9% of those ballots. So if that trend were to continue into the general election, which I don't think it will, I think it'll go up a little bit, that would mean that the Democrats are no longer a major party. Let's see here. Always an area of interest in any Wyoming election. Let's see if they're right about this, because I actually have this slide that'll prove this. Voters changing their party affiliation to participate in crowded GOP nomination process might have factored into the result. Not only is it a sore point among hardline politicos and some candidates, but drawing a definitive conclusion, let's see here, from raw registration figures is rife with nuance. Okay. Albany County, for example, listed 10,000 registered Republicans and 11,000 on August 1st, with the number of registered Democrats from, okay, so they're getting lost in the numbers here. Let's see here. This year, registered Republicans cast 132,000 ballots amid the high-profile fight between more moderate lawmakers. By the way, that term moderate is such a canard. I mean, the term moderate tells you that, well, these people are really in the middle. No, they're not. So are you telling me that a candidate that is in favor of elective abortions at any time, it's a choice between a woman and her doctor? Are you telling me that is a moderate belief in Wyoming? It's not. If you look at pretty much, even the nationwide polling will tell you that most people are, even though I disagree with this, are in favor of some restrictions to abortion, and only a few exceptions. That's where the moderate point is, or that the government needs to take over healthcare, which is Eric Barlow, people like Micah Sturdivant. Those are not moderate beliefs. Those are far left beliefs, and it irritates me to no end when the media misleads you and tries to tell you that all of these people are moderates, which they're not at all. Let's see here. Okay, so anyway, pretty much done with that. let's kind of move on to something a little bit more interesting. This one is super important for the midterm elections from Fox News. Trump scores Supreme Court win on mail-in voting restrictions before the midterms. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court handed the Trump administration a victory on Monday, allowing it to enforce Donald Trump's election integrity executive order restricting mail-in voting ahead of the November midterms. This is a big one, my friends. If you want to see the number one place of fraud, it's mail-in voting. The High Court lifted an injunction that had blocked the order in 23 states that challenged it after the administration appealed in July. The U.S. Postal Service and Justice Department said they would immediately implement the revised ballot mail ballot restrictions after the ruling. Most immediately, the ruling clears the path for the U.S. Postal Service to check its distribution of mail-in ballots against a list of citizens maintained by the Department of Homeland Security. But it's also a significant political victory for the Trump administration, as it has advocated against the widespread use of mail-in voting, citing what it believes is a heightened vulnerability to tampering and voter fraud. Most recently, Trump slammed what he called a suspiciously high volume of mail-in ballots cast in the Cynthia Ramon in the 2026 LA mayoral race primary. So why... And this should be common sense, but why is mail-in voting so rife with fraud? Well, because you just arbitrarily mail out ballots, and here is a good point. You know, in Wyoming, we're told that the voter registration list they're scrubbed in February. If you don't vote in the general, you're out. We scrub them. Well, it's definitely not true in Sheridan County. In Sheridan County, multiple candidates reported to me that they had hundreds of pieces of mail returned as not deliverable. In other words, that person did not live there anymore, and yet that address is still on the walking list. Your walking list is generated by the registered voter list in your county. And so people go into register to vote, they put their address down, and then they move. But their name still appears at that same address. Now, okay, so Wyoming has voter ID. We have our version of the SAVE Act. Wyoming did pass the SAVE Act before it was ever thought of in Congress. But still, you have a whole bunch of people listed at addresses that they no longer live at. So if we were to have mail-in voting here, which thank God we don't, but if we were, those ballots would be mailed to all of those people at that address. And so what would prevent somebody from filling out the 5 ballots that they got in their mailbox and sending them in? Well, it gets worse. In most places that have mail-in balloting also have ballot harvesting. Ballot harvesting is somebody that can go from house to house and just collect ballots. Hey, knock, knock. Hey, have you turned in your ballot yet? No? Okay, so fill it out for me. By the way, you should vote for all of the Democrat people on the ticket. And then give that to me. And then all of those people go around and they collect all the ballots, and then they just go and drop them in a drop box. And the only way that you can verify who's on the voting rolls is by the envelope. Once the ballot and the envelope are separated, there's no way to determine who cast this ballot. And so there's no way to check. And if you are mailing multiple ballots to the same address, which would happen in Wyoming if we had mail-in balloting, it is just fraud waiting to happen. And so Trump's order dramatically reduced the possibility of having that scenario happen. So it's still going to happen, by the way, because our voter rolls are not clean. You see, there are so many pitfalls in this election integrity thing that if you don't cover all of them, there's always a loophole. Let me give you another one. So in Wyoming, we passed Senate File 113. And that was Poison Barry Crago's law that mandates a 5% hand count of in each county. And what's going to happen is the Secretary of State is going to select which race that you're going to count, and all of the legislative races are counted in that up to 5%. And so the counties then, theoretically, would randomly select which precincts they're going to count. When they get up to 5%, they're good. So they might pick so for example, in Sheridan, let's say the first one that they drew was, I don't know, Ranchester. Ranchester is not going to give you 5% of the ballots. And so you put that one down. And then maybe the next one you drew is precinct 12-1. 12-1 in Sheridan is pretty big. Okay, all right. So that puts us at 5%. So you would hand count all of the ballots from those two precincts. Here's the problem. In the statute, it doesn't say how those precincts are chosen. So it could be random. They could say, hey, you know what? We're sure that our election was straight in precinct 3-3. So we're going to pick that one. And then we hand count it, and nobody's the wiser. You see, there's a loophole around a lot of these things. And until we sew up all of those, we're not going to have a secure election. And anybody that argues that, oh, our elections, our elections are completely secure. There has not been a prosecuted case of voter fraud. There's been maybe one or two, but it's really not a problem. Well, you're not going to find a problem if you don't look. And why shouldn't we have a secure election? And the arguments against it, well, you're making it harder for people to vote. Really. So why is it harder for people to vote if you have a clean voter roll? Why does it make it harder for people to vote if you randomly select the precinct that you're going to audit? It doesn't. Why is it harder to vote for mandatory voter ID? Well, it's hard for old people and women to get IDs. No, it isn't. People get checked for IDs all the time. And, I just the other day, I was in the gas station, and there was a lady who was obviously way older than me that was buying a pack of cigarettes, and she still got carded. And magically, she was able to produce her ID out of her purse. The truth is, my friends, this whole thing, it's harder for black people and women and old people to get IDs. It's a bunch of crap. If you really want to talk about a problem, maybe you should say, well, a lot of elderly people don't drive. Okay, so it's hard for them to get to the polls. That one I would probably agree with, but there again, we have public transportation, so all they got to do is call. And on voting day, there's a lot of people that would gladly give you a ride to the polling location just so long if you're going to vote. Now, Patrick's got an interesting question. He says, what rate of error is deemed material? Well, that's a good question, because I would argue as close to zero as possible. But there again, can you get close to zero? I would argue no, for a number of reasons. And if you were to hand count everything, and this is, I love you guys that are all about election integrity, but a 100% hand count is just as fraught with errors as any other system. There's human error in it. You could anybody ever played the telephone game? Where you have a line of 10 people and you whisper something in somebody's ear, and by the time it gets to the 10th person, it's going to be different. Same thing holds true with hand counting. And, not only that, the expositions of hand counting that I've seen take forever. And so we got to find a more efficient way. And I think, honestly, if we upped the percentage of the hand count audit and it was truly random, I think that's pretty good. I mean, we've had tabulation machines around since I was in grade school. You got your little standardized test. I remember being in third grade and seeing the standardized test counting machine in one of the offices. I remember that being in third grade. So we've had those around for a long time, and so long as you're auditing and the audit is truly random, and we're validating that the machines are counting accurately. That's the other big thing. It's also been reported to me that a lot of machines in Wyoming, in several different counties, weren't even certified for a number of reasons. Either the procedure wasn't followed or the machines weren't even tested. And in Weston County, where we had the big Weston County debacle, those machines weren't reading accurately either because the ballots were wrong. And so there are a number of things that have to be sewn up here. And if you add on top of it mail-in voting, if we were to, holy crap, talk about talk about a whirlwind of a problem. So, so the truth is we have to be honest about our elections, and we should want them as secure as possible. And if there's a problem in an election, we should hold those people accountable. And I think, even though I disagreed with the plea deal in the Weston County thing, at least Becky Hadlock was held accountable. She's no longer the clerk. She ended up resigning that position, by the way. But if she didn't resign, she would have been removed from office anyway. But at the very least, okay, so she was held accountable. But we've got to continue doing that. And we've got to be able to win the argument as conservatives. It's a lot of times as conservatives, our arguments come off as though our hair is lit on fire. And, at least to me, sometimes it seems as though we're just screaming into the wind, election integrity. Well, that's important. You got to win the argument. You have to be the one there saying, okay, why is it that we can't do this? And you got to get them on the record. And that way it can be reported. And therein lies another problem is the media. Yesterday, so this is completely unrelated, but I think it's a good example. So the Cowboy ran an article, I don't know, last week before, about how in Sheridan County, there was a group that wanted to rename one of the Sheridan Peaks after Sergeant Krinke. And the Cowboy ran a big article, and this is going to be great. Well, at the Sheridan County Commission meeting yesterday, the commissioners tied in a vote and said, no, we're not going to rename it after one person. There are a lot of people that have lost their lives in our county, and so would rather honor all of them instead of just one. It's no reflection on Sergeant Krinke. It was a tragedy. That guy was a hero. He was a veteran. No question about that. But let's honor everybody. Okay, so looking at the Wyoming media or the Sheridan media this morning, both the company, Sheridan Media, and the Sheridan Press, no article. Okay, nothing to lead people to believe that anything happened there. And when it comes to the election and politics, it's also pretty well biased. And all you got to do, again, run the experiment. Show me one article that has been critical of any of the redcoats. Just one. All you got to do is find that from the Cowboy, and I'll shut up about it. The truth is, you probably can't. So the truth is, my friends, that we do not have a secure election system, and there are numerous things that we could do to fix it, one of which the Supreme Court helped us with last week. Continuing with the article, most recently, Trump slammed what he called the suspiciously high volume of mail-in ballots cast in the L.A. mayoral race. Quote, they don't have voting booths. Everything's by mail. I don't think a Republican can win in California unless you pass the Save America Act, which is mandatory ID. Trump told Fox News, referring to GOP legislation to narrow the scope of mail-in voting and voter ID requirements. They're going to have to get rid of mail-in voting. Like many onlooking conservatives, Trump pointed out that after election night, the vast majority of Democrat votes had been for Nithya Rahman. Weird. That's strange. Creating a delayed outpouring of support. Fox News Digital has not reviewed any particular case of election fraud tied to that race. Even so, Trump's original executive order looked to eliminate any ambiguity, titled Preserving and Protecting the Integrity of American Elections. It directed federal agencies to compile citizenship-based lists of eligible voters and ordered the U.S. Postal Service to deliver mail-in ballots only to people appearing on those approved lists. Several federal laws prohibit foreign nationals from registering to vote. Yeah, you shouldn't be voting if you're not a U.S. citizen. Yet states fail adequately to vet voters' citizenship, and in recent years, the DOJ has failed to prioritize and devote sufficient resources to enforcement of these provisions. And there's the other thing. If there is a question about an election, why is it that we are treating those so cavalierly? Why is it that when an election is questioned, we're not Johnny on the spot saying, oh, crap, we've got to fix this? It seems to me that all election offenses are kind of treated like jaywalking. Now, right now, it was Cowboy State Politics that broke the story, I think it was last year, that there were 16 election complaints that were deemed referable by the Secretary of State. Now, I will admit that a couple of those kind of marginal. Okay. But there were several of them. There were absolutely big problems. And the Attorney General of the state of Wyoming at the time, Bridget Hill, and now Keith Couts, have done nothing with them. Absolutely nothing. They're sitting on the desk. And one of those was a pretty big one. It was investigated by the Sheridan County Sheriff's Department. It involved a sitting representative and a sitting county commissioner, and they tried to cover up what they did, and they manufactured a political action committee. And I mean, they did a whole bunch of different stuff, and none of it was prosecuted. Not a single thing, because of politics. We've got to stop that, my friends. When there is an election question, when there's an election complaint, when there is an election law that's broken, we should pay attention to those and prosecute them. The only way that you're going to get this stuff to stop, if it is, and here again, we don't even know that if it's happening. You know, people like Gail Simmons will stand on her soapbox all day long and say, well, it's never been prosecuted. Okay, because you don't look. And even if there is a case, you don't prosecute it anyway. I can give you 16 of them right now, Gail, that are sitting down in Keith Couts' office that he's done nothing with. And Bridget Hill didn't do anything with them either. Bridget Hill, by the way, is now on the Supreme Court. God help us all. So, you know, the election integrity thing, there's lots of things that we need to do. One of those, we absolutely should make it as transparent as possible. And here's the other side of it. If the other side, that is the liberals, the redcoats, the Democrats, if they're tired of hearing all of us complain and moan about election integrity, then do it transparently. Like, do it as transparent as possible so that we can all see that there was no problem with the election. And when and if there is no problem with it, well, then we don't have anything left to argue. Now, do we? If you're tired of us complaining about it, then prove us wrong. And when you do, then we won't have a leg to stand on it. Or if it turns out that there is a discrepancy, well, then we need to fix it. But my guess would be the reason why elected officials, are so resistant to increased transparency is they don't know if there will be a discrepancy or not. And they don't want to be held accountable if and when that happens. So let's go ahead and take another break. And when we come back, we'll finish up the program. I mean, this whole election thing, we're right in the middle of tomorrow. The Secretary of State's going to certify the election. And then then we do the audit. Yeah, I don't know what happens if the audit comes out totally bogus, but I guess we're going to find out. More in a minute. Are you sick to death of being told what to think? Maybe you don't even realize that it's happening. Freedom Caucus bad, big spending, big government, liberal, Republican good. Conservatives are bad and they want to starve little children. I have heard it all, my friends. We are way past the time when the news was just the news, if it ever was. But wouldn't it be nice if you had a news platform that was at least honest about what they were telling you? News on the news page, opinion on the opinion page. That's exactly what the Open Range Record is. Go to the website, openrangerecord.com. News, analysis, opinion, and investigative journalism. One more time, that website is openrangerecord.com. You can listen and watch Cowboy State Politics live on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble every Tuesday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pay attention to all that other block-headed, Borg-like so-called news if you want. But if you want to get the real story, watch Cowboy State Politics live. And now, back to the program. One more thought on this election integrity stuff. If you live in Sheridan County, do me a favor. I know at least a couple people listening right now do live in Sheridan County. So yesterday at the county commissioners meeting, Commissioner Arze made a request for the audit, which is going to happen on Saturday. And that request was simply, all right, let's put all the precincts in a glass bowl, one that's transparent. And we'll just write, the precinct numbers on a little slip of paper, fold it up, put them in the bucket, and then you just draw. So all the precincts are drawn randomly, and everybody can see what's happening. And the other part of it is we're going to randomly draw a machine to do the audit with. Not one that anybody picks in the clerk's office, not anything that the county commissioners pick, none of it. And I guess it's the clerk, it's not the county commissioners that pick. But that was his request. Let's do it all randomly. And that way we can all see that everything was above board, or if it wasn't. And so if you live in Sheridan County, I call the county commissioners, pick one of them, and just call them and say, hey, we want this done, and we want it done now. We want to see if everything is above board, and we thoroughly expect that it is. We just want to see it. We got this new law. Let's start off on the right foot, and let's do it right. But let's do it randomly in public, and where it's videotaped and everybody can see what's happening. So call the county commissioner, call the county clerk, and well, you got to call the clerk's office because frankly, the county clerk in Sheridan's, I guess she's still in the hospital. She did have a fall and it wasn't good, and you should pray for her. But I guess we got a deputy clerk. I don't even know. There wasn't a clerk at the county commissioners meeting yesterday, so I don't know I don't know if the fox is guarding the hen house over there or what's happening, but call a county commissioner. And I promise you, if you irritate them enough, you'll get a response. So let's move on. So a couple of times I've mentioned this. See, I'm censoring myself here. I got a couple words for this guy in Michigan who's running for the Senate, El Sayed. Well, he was on Jesse Waters last night. And turns out that he is in favor of, let's start out with this one instead of, he said some crazy things that he's in favor of. Now, one of those is that he's in favor of the new Green Deal. And, hey, man, you got to give him credit for going on Waters and, doing an interview after he said all this crazy stuff like seizing the means of production and all this. But here's what he said on Waters when asked about the Green New Deal. And it's, again, give him credit for showing up. By the way, there are a lot of Wyoming politicians that did not have the courage to come on this program. Now, Melissa Butcher, I kind of understand a little bit. I mean, Agent 29 was her opponent. But Micah Sturdivant flat told me that she wasn't going to do it. Ryan Koltiska said he wasn't going to do it. And now those people are elected, so they have no excuse. Now, this guy, this crazy socialist commie up in Michigan, he went on Jesse Waters. Seems to be a little bit more high profile than this program. But anyway, here's what he said about the Green New Deal. Check this out.
I drive a plug-in hybrid made right in the United States. The bigger question about cars, though, is why the president just started a trade war or escalated a trade war with Canada. It's about to make all of our cars, especially the internal combustion engine cars, so much more expensive.
You want to get rid of the internal combustion engine?
Prices. No, I don't. Who told you that?
That's what the Green New Deal says.
My dad came to America to design internal combustion engines. No, that's not what the Green New Deal says.
Phase out fossil fuels.
Build renewable energy opportunities. Look, I'm not going to defend the Green New Deal. What I'm telling you, though, is that we can make a whole
You're on the record
as
backing the Green New Deal, Abdul.
Look, I'm just telling you this. Are you opposed to the idea that we could reduce energy costs and create jobs in Michigan?
Absolutely, but I don't want windmills in Lake Michigan.
So you're absolutely opposed to that?
Yeah, I don't want to put windmills in Lake Michigan.
You'd rather have windmills.
I don't think the people in Michigan want that, Abdul.
If
you're running on that, that's not going to go over too well.
We have a pipeline. No. I mean, Jesse, look, we can have a conversation if you want to. If you want to keep cutting me off, we could keep doing that too. But you told me we're going to have a good conversation. I just want to talk about something.
Go ahead.
Right now, we have an oil pipeline in the Great Lakes. If that oil pipeline were to burst, the consequences for our Great Lakes would be disastrous. Now, you're telling me that you'd rather have a situation where that happened than a windmill? That really is so offensive to you?
No.
Those windmills are good
I'm saying I don't want to get rid of fossil fuels, and that's what the Green New Deal does. Let's move on. You want to soak the rich. Look, Rabdul, because this isn't a podcast. I got to sell ads in the breaks. You want to soak the rich. Let's listen to what you said about the taxes. Run it.
I also think we got to start taxing wealth for people who have over $100 million. I mean, at that point, like, what even are you going to do with more money?
What are you going to do with more money? I mean, whatever I want.
I mean, Jesse, I don't know how much you make. Look,
not $1 billion.
But I think I'd rather have. Well, yeah, look, so that's exactly it, right? The question ultimately is, do you want to drive on good roads, or would you rather have a billionaire make a second billion?
Okay,
that's what Mike Rogers wants.
Stop. Okay, so there's the bullcrap argument right there. Would you rather drive on smooth roads or let this billionaire get richer? Roads, infrastructure, water, sewer, police, fire, and a little bit of administration. Those are the proper rules of government. That's why we pay taxes. Those happen anyway, regardless of if this jerk says that rich people have to give more money. That's the job of government. Like the taxes that we pay right now, like the return on our investment is that we have smooth roads. And by the way, government is not very efficient in doing that. Go look at all the potholes. Interestingly enough, you rarely find a pothole outside of the mayor's house. Just saying. But those are the necessary, the proper roles of government. Those are the things that government has to do. That's the return on our investment. And anybody that argues that if we don't tax you more, you're not going to have an ambulance service. Okay, that's not even remotely true. A few years ago, the governor mandated a 20% cut across the board in the state. Everybody still had an ambulance. Everybody still had a hospital. We still had roads. Granted, maybe a couple of potholes, a couple more potholes, but all those things were still there. And so really, this whole argument of if we don't tax the rich, you're not going to have all of those things, it's really a red herring. Now, how that works in Wyoming is when the property tax discussion came up, just a 25% reduction. I'm not kidding you, and I should have taken a picture of this, but the entire Capitol building in Cheyenne was encircled with fire trucks. They had firemen in full uniform sitting in the Senate and House chambers, and they stayed there until that bill was over. It was completely a threatening environment. But the truth is, even though that 25% tax reduction went into effect, we still have fire departments. I don't know of a single fireman that legitimately lost their job. Now, maybe you had a county here or there that tried to pull the whole Obama, let's close down the World War II memorial to make a point. Maybe you had a county that did that, but I don't know of a single fireman that legitimately lost their job because of that. And the reason for it is counties don't get a big chunk of their revenue from residential property taxes. The biggest hit out of that entire bill, the 25% tax reduction, was Sheridan County, and I think it was like 5 or 6%. It was around there. But we still got roads. Those aren't crumbling. We still have an ambulance. We still have a hospital. We still have a police force. We still have a sheriff's department. We still have all of those things. And so anytime you hear this tax the rich rhetoric, it is a giant red herring. Don't believe it. And in the past election, that was a big issue in the election. Well, all these services, if we don't have taxes, we're not going to have all of these services. Well, those services were never going away anyway. Okay, it was a giant red herring. But the truth is, in the 2026 primary, Wyoming voters really did vote for higher taxes. And here's how I get there. Because the people you elected are going to raise your taxes, if not directly, indirectly. They are already discussing Medicaid expansion at the stupid healthcare affordability task force or whatever they call it. It's Ken's on that committee. But that was the main topic of conversation was, well, we should just expand Medicaid. If you do that, government spending is necessarily going to increase, which means, and by the way, government doesn't have its own money. It's all yours. And so if government spending does go up, that means you pay more in taxes. Or if they add another service, or if they completely fund the summer school lunch program, or any of those things, increase spending. That spending has to come from somewhere, and it comes out of your pocket. Now, let's go ahead and listen to the rest of this whole tax the rich BS.
That's what Donald Trump wants. Apparently, that's what you want. I think the people in Michigan want something different. They want good roads and good schools.
So you're saying Beyonce, who just became a billionaire, she has to break you off something every year? She has to pay the politicians.
Yeah. It's not me. It's the American public.
You're
Beyonce,
the one that wants the money.
To be able to contribute back to the public schools that she went to.
I think contribute back to the public schools. That's another one that we hear. No one, not a single person, can legitimately make an argument in Wyoming that our schools are not way overfunded. There is not a single person that can make that legitimate argument. Now, they might be able to say, well, we can't pay for athletics with this whole silo thing. That means that, one, they're spending too much on activities. Two, it means they were funding activities with money meant for teachers, which, by the way, is, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of the whole purpose behind a school. But there is nobody that can make a legitimate argument that Wyoming schools are underfunded. That is a non sequitur. When we're spending in excess of $23,000 per student, honestly, give any parent $22,000, $23,000 and say, educate your kid. That kid will have the top of the line everything. If they had to spend it all on, education, top of the line computer, top of the line. You could fill out probably in a pretty good sized wood shop in your garage if you had $25,000 to spend. The ridiculousness of this argument just blows my mind, my friends. And you hear it, and I've seen it on posts from Cowboy state politics, school board members claiming, oh, no, it's this whole silo thing. It just really, really screwed up our funding. Really? The budget for Sheridan School District number 2 is over $80 million. The total budget for the city of Sheridan is slightly above 25. I don't know the exact number, but it's right around there somewhere. And the school doesn't have to pay for fire. They don't have to pay for the police. They don't have to pay for roads. They don't have to pay for water and sewer. They don't have to pay for the trash pickup. They don't have to pay for the guy that mows the park. They don't have to pay for the water that waters the park. They don't have to pay for any of those things. And even the transportation to and from their outrageously expensive activities, they're reimbursed for. So where is that $80 million going to? A large chunk of it goes to administration. And here's how you know that. Because if you, and just take Wyoming as a whole, there's 48 school districts, 48 in the entire state. The second most populous state or the second most populous county in Wyoming is Natrona County. They have 1 school district. They have a much higher population than does Sheridan County, and Sheridan County has 3. Now, granted, one of them is way out in the boonies, but there again, in Natrona County, you still have Midwest. As the crow flies, it's a pretty close distance. So why does that one need its whole school district? And you can make the same argument about school district number 1. And if you consolidated all of them, you reduce your administration costs by 1/3. Another big problem is the rolling average. This one always blows my mind. So let's say that you take your kid out of, Sheridan High School, and you want them to go and you move to Ranchester, and you want them to go to the Ranchester High School. Well, there's what is called a 3-year rolling average. So the first year that you've moved, both Ranchester and Sheridan get the same amount of money as they would have received for your kid. So your kid is not in Sheridan High School, but they're still getting paid as if your kid was. Now, the second year, and I don't remember the percentages, but the second year they get a slightly reduced amount, and then the third year they get a slightly reduced amount. And at the same time, the school in Ranchester is getting full payment for your kid being there. So multiply that across the entire state, and we're talking about huge sums of money. Add on top of that, ghost teachers. This one is also pretty crazy. In 2024, there were 800 teaching positions that you and I were paying for, that the teachers did not exist. And so what school districts would do is they would take the funding from the school model, and the legislature can't tell a school district how exactly to spend its money. They can suggest it, say, we think you need 50 teachers. So what the school district would do would be to hire 40 teachers and take that money from the 10 teachers, benefits and all, it's all paid for, that money, and they would move it over to administration or to activities or to whatever. And by the way, schools don't pay for buildings either. The state pays for that. And so the funding of all of the schools is a gigantic nightmare. And you, my friends, are being absolutely misled on all of it. If you get anything in the mail that comes from the Wyoming Education Association, you should quickly deposit it in file 13 because it's not worth the paper that it's printed on, and it's probably full of a whole bunch of lies. You know, it's kind of a joke among conservative legislators that they get, if they get rated anywhere above a 0 from the Wyoming Education Association, they get, oh, you must become a liberal now. You're voting for education. Look at that. They gave you a good score. Well, it's because the Wyoming Education Association, they very rarely tell anybody the truth. Okay, so here's one more from El Sayed in Michigan. And this is another one that we hear that, oh, that's not happening here. Not happening here. No, we don't have anything like this. Check it out.
You dodged again. Sex changes for minors. Do you support that?
Look, I remember having great conversations with my conservative friends about right to try legislation.
Right
the
to
idea
try.
That the government shouldn't tell you what kind of health care you should have. I just think the government shouldn't tell you what kind of health care you should have. And if you're a minor, it's between
you want to
your
try
doctor
on
and your
kids?
parent. Now, if you disagree with that, if you disagree that health care decisions need to be made by a doctor and their parents and a patient, then we think we agree to disagree. But you want to put government inside.
So Abdul,
a
you're a doctor, right?
Selectively. I am.
So you think it's okay for a parent to slash his kid's thing-a-ling off? You think that's okay?
I mean, do you really want to have this conversation? Are you circumcised?
Wow.
Yeah, but I mean, that's...
Okay, so did you notice that he didn't really answer the question except to say, well, yeah, I think, it's health care. Explain to me what health care suggests chopping off a healthy body part. If you're a doctor and you had a patient come in and said, you know what, I think I should have really been born with one arm. This other arm over here, I don't think I should have, I want you to chop it off. Do you know any doctor that would say anything other than, maybe we ought to get you some psychiatric help? Okay, that would definitely happen. In fact, I got a doctor's appointment coming up. Maybe I'll ask my doctor his opinion on that. I already know that. He's a conservative. So, but the point being is that when it comes to, chopping the healthy body parts off of kids, evidently that's okay. It's healthcare. No, it's not, my friends. But this is the radicalism that is happening in other states. And, as I think it was on Friday that I was talking about this, but typically things that happen on a national level take a little bit of time to get to Wyoming. Sometimes it's a couple of years, sometimes it's a couple of months, but that sort of thing is happening in Wyoming. And it was just 2 sessions ago that we passed Chloe's Law. Of course, the title was changed, but we banned trans surgeries in the state. That's a good thing, right? Now, if you're over 18 and you want to, mutilate your body, go for it. That's your decision. But we shouldn't be performing those surgeries on children. But that's the radicalism that's happening at the national level. And this guy, this Syed character, he's probably going to win. And he will be in the U.S. Senate right alongside Harriet Hageman. Think about that for a second. That is where we have gone. And the Syed character, I mean, he is a full-blown communist. I should have grabbed the sound bites of him calling for seizing the means of production. But he's also, and there's another sound bite, I think it's actually at the end of this one, where Jesse asks him about Sharia law. And in fact, you know what? Let's play it. I think it's in here. So
Jesse, are you?
Personal question.
Okay,
doctor.
So you probably should want to move on.
Is circumcision's different than castration?
I think it's a problem. It's a problem that you think that you get to decide what happens between a parent, a doctor, and a patient. And I'm just saying that, yes, circumcision is surgery on a kid's ding-a-ling. So if you really want to bring that up, you can. I just think you guys are really selective about how you want to talk about these things.
Abdul, Michigan's not going for that. That is sick stuff. boys playing in girls' sports.
I'm not advocating anything. I'm just saying.
What about that?
So the question, so again, like Jesse, you have not asked me one time about the issues that people actually care about in Michigan. You don't want to talk about gas prices. You don't want to talk about groceries. You don't want to talk about healthcare. You don't want to talk about the stupid trade war that's about to destroy Michigan's economy.
We spent the whole interview talking about that stuff.
That's destroying that is destroying our own military. You don't seem to want to talk about any of those things. You want to bring up all this culture war.
You know, I saw a thing on TV last night, documentary about Mr. T. I pity the fool. I used to love Mr. T. Anyway, so that pretty much does it for today's installment of the broadcast, my friends. You got audits coming up in your home county. And again, let me ask you to do this for me. If you live in Sheridan County, call the county commissioners. Just pick one of them and call them. Nobody objected yesterday when Commissioner Arze brought up this idea. And just tell them, we want the audit to be transparent. Now, understand that it's not the county commissioners that can make that decision. It's the clerk. But the county commissioners can say, look, my phone has been blowing up. Let's just do this. Let's just do this transparently. So call a county commissioner and say, hey, I want you to draw the precincts just randomly, and I want you to randomly pick a machine to do the audit. That way, it'll put this whole argument to bed, at least in Sheridan County. And if you live in another county, do the same thing. Now, I don't know when all of the audits are in other counties, but they have to happen within 9 days of the election. And so they're going to happen sometime during this week. But call your county commissioner. If you know the county clerk, call them and say, look, this is an easy way to put this argument to bed. And we just want to see if our election was solid. I'm sure it was. I'm sure everything is above board. I just want you to prove it to me because I'm hearing a lot of stuff, and I just want it to be clear. And if they give you any static, then the next question you ask them is, what are you hiding? Because there's no reason why why a politician would not want to prove that their election was 100% legit. And if they give you any static, the follow-up question is, what are you trying to hide? And I mean, by the way, I'm going to warn you, the conversation is going to go downhill from there. But you've all got one of these. Set this thing to record and record the conversation and then send it to me. But any politician that's interested in their own legitimacy of their election shouldn't have a problem with it. And they can absolutely do that according to Senate File 113. So give them a call, make sure that happens, and report back to me. Let me know how that conversation went. All right, my friends, that pretty much does it for today. Tomorrow, hopefully, we'll be back in the downtown studio. Can't wait to hear about Agent 29's adventure over the mountain. Anyway, have a good afternoon, my friends, from the base of the Bighorns. I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. Have a good afternoon, my friends. I'll see you tomorrow.